Okay, Rabotai, today I would like to discuss a topic that, despite the fact that Lechora, it would seem to be a davar pashut, but I think there's a certain misunderstanding in the perception that people commonly think that the Moroccans or the Iraqis or the Tunisians or the Teimanim, pick whichever Ida you want, follow Minhagim, and those who follow the psakim of Rav Ovadia Yosef don't follow Minhagim. You'll hear that common perception, which is something that is based on ignorance, that people have not learned the sugyot properly and have not learned the teshuvot of Maran Rav Ovadia Yosef well enough. And we're going to discuss today Rav Ovadia Yosef's legacy and approach to Minhagim, and to understand really the Nikudat HaMachloket, why certain Minhagim he was opposed to, what lies behind it, why there's certain Minhagim like the Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat or Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo, and why others kept this Minhagim. It's important to understand what the root of the Machloket is, and with understanding the root of the Machloket, you will much better understand what's the general outlook of this great Gaon of the previous of the generation that influenced so many in his halachic works on the approach to Minhagim. So let's start with the following. We've spoken about in the past the opinion of the Pri Chadash in Siman Tav Tzadi Vav of Ilchot Pesach, Chelek Asiri, where the Pri Chadash takes issue with the Maharik. The Maharik wrote that Minhag mevatel halacha kipshuto. It would seem to be that a minhag is mevatel halacha, even if the minhag doesn't have so much to rely on, you follow the minhag. And the Magen Avraham reiterates this in Hilchot Megillah, Siman Taf Resh Tzadi. There the Magen Avraham brings in the name of the Maharik that even a minhag that is based on we'll call it a shita that's dechuya, and a shita that you wouldn't normally somech on unless it's shatat chak. Nevertheless, if the minhag is like that, minhag mevatel halacha. And the Khatam Sofer quotes over there, ala makom, ayin pri chadash shechalak al Marik, and he said, and his mashma that the Khatam Sofer says, like the Pri Chadash, that b'chiyai gavna we would be mevatel the minhag, and the Mishtabura brings this Khatam Sofer in the Bir Alacha as well. The Khatam Sofer also quotes a shach in Yoredea Siman Resh Nuntet Seif Chet that says lechaora, a similar concept. So from here, there is a conception that people say there's a machloket between the Pri Chadash and the Marik, whether anytime you have a pikpuk and halacha, you could be mevatel a minhag or not. So one who carefully reads the Pri Chadash and the Marik will see that they're talking about a very specific case. They're talking about a case where a minhag on a derabanan or a davar she'enu mefurash b'Torah was practiced, was hunhag, and since this minhag was kept, despite the fact that it's going against normative halacha, Marik says it's mevatel minhag, and the Pri Chadash proves from our Gemara in Rosh Hashanah not that way. Actually, Rabbi Kiva Eger argues on the Pri Chadash, and he says the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah seems to be that you would follow this minhag. But the Pri Chadash himself says he's only talking about in that type of case, and I'll read you his exact lashon to make sure that we don't that there's no lack of clarity over here. The Pri Chadash says the following: Umilta de pshita דרב לא אמרה אלא היכא דאביה פלוגתא ונתפשט המנהג אחד מניו ואפילו כסברת היחיד נגד רבים. Rav, who was not mevatel minhag, was talking about a case where there's a machloket and it was nitpashet, like one opinion, and even like svarat yachid, even if it's a svara yachid against the rabbim, says the Pri Chadash, we follow, in that case, everybody agrees we follow the minhag. I'm talking about, says the Pri Chadash, kivan de halachat kuai shenaguam besandal, afim yavo Eliyahu v'yomar hepech mizeh, havelik esfarat rabim en shomin lo. Even though Eliyahu says like svarat rabim en shomin lo. Aval milta de brera, but something that's clear. De have isura de rabbanan, that's an isura de rabbanan. We hit him on the head with a hammer. It's clear that it's an isur de rabbanan and there's nothing to rely on. So it's clear that the Pri Chadash is talking about something that we don't rely on at all, and this is what this is what we are against. And the Marik says still we're mekayim the minhag, which it wouldn't make sense. In one area I wrote, it seems to be the Marik follows the opinion that even if a minhag has nothing to rely on, you're somech on the minhag, what sense does that make? It's against halacha. But maybe the Marik held there is what to rely on, just there's not so much to rely on, and you still follow the minhag. But then I found Marana Or HaChaim HaKadosh in the Pri Toar, Yoredea Siman Lametet, where he talks about the famous Castilian minhag. You know, there was one of the biggest machloket of the time in Morocco when the Migurashim came and were and mekel on certain sirchot. They didn't follow glat. We'll call it. I'm simplifying it. And the toshavim held of glat, and it was a very, very big machloket until I'm not even going to call it glat. I'll call it what it was, a sircha ladofen. They were mekel on a big kula, and he goes against it. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh. And he says, Betoch Dvarav, he deals with the Pri Chadash, and he says, Avadai, that the opinion that held that minag mevatel halacha on a dirabanan or on davar sheinu mefurash b'Torah is because we don't want to make people look like they're mistaken, ketoim, like they're mistaken. And since we don't want to make people like they're mistaken, so in a case where they're noeg that way, we let them rely on the minhag. Ad kedei kach that there was the case in the Gemara that Rav let a person even make a bracha on halel, even though it wasn't the minhag to make a bracha on halel. Obviously he felt, there's what to be somech on, maybe because it's like a bracha ala nes. But if it's an isur mamash, we wouldn't let him. But since it's an isur de rabbanan, and it's going to look like to'eh, so that's why we allow it. So you see from the Pri Toar that he's understanding this Marik is talking about a very extreme case where the minhag mamash kimat has nothing to rely on. Then we have the Magen Avram and the Marik that you still follow the minhag, the Pri Chadash Chatam Sofer that we don't, and the Chatam Sofer quotes a shach, that the shach says that the reason why we don't follow the minhag, he says it has to be a minhag kavua. It has to be minhag kavua sheunag al pi chachmei ador, a real minhag. Which, by the way, I just want to tell you, this was the guiding light in all of Sefer Magen Avot al pi this shach, that we tried never to establish a minhag if it wasn't hunhag al pi gdolei ador, minhag kavua. So it turns out that the Pri Chadash, Chatam Sofer, everybody agrees that if it's a minhag, even if it's for the minority of opinions, but it's something that's established and in minhag kavua, that's what we follow. If it's a minhag that is not kavua, it's not so, it's not kavua on a dirabanan or davar sheinu mefurash b'Torah, that's a machloket Magen Avram Pri Chadash. Now there are those who say so. To say that there's nobody who follows like the Marik, which I think Rav Yitzchak Yosef wrote that the Magen Avot says that we follow the Marik, nobody follows the Marik. First of all, Magen Avot doesn't write that we follow the Marik. The Magen Avot says that the Rav Elyashiv said that we when there's what to rely on a minhag, we're not mevatel. Not like the Pri Chadash, which now we're explaining, even the Pri Chadash would agree to this. So what first of all, to say that nobody holds of the Marik is not exact. There's many poskim that follow the Marik. I'll just name a few of them. The Magen Avram, Rabbi Kiveger seems to go against the Pri Chadash over here. The Sefer, the Zera Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Ben Naim, soon hopefully to be reprinted by Machon Magen Avot in Siman He. He was the Ben Doro Shel Achida. also writes that we follow that it seems to be we don't follow the Pri Chadash in this. The Sefer Kupat Arochrim of Rabbi Didia Monsonego brings as well that this Magen Avram, which is the Ber Heitev, brings this Magen Avram. Just a few more poskim on this matter. The Sefer Erech Lechem also in Siman Resh Memchet of Ilchot Shabbat brings this Magen Avraham. Let me see if just to to start naming poskim to follow the Magen Avraham is not really our style, but I'll just because there are those because according to Rav Yitzchak Yosef there's nobody who follows the Magen Avraham. So the Knesset HaGedolah as well in Siman Resh Kufayin Gimel writes it as well in the name of the Marashach. The Masal HaMelech, which Pri Chadash himself brings, Samach Daled Amud Bet, also says like the Magen Avram. So and there are more. I'm not going to get into this. So it's a machloket. It's not clear how we would follow, but that's an extreme case. But from the words of the Pri Chadash, we're megale that even if we have a Svarat Yachid, but it's nitpashet kmo Svarat Yachid, that's what we follow. Now, let's get to the Mishnah Torah of Rav Ovadia Yosef. Some people understood from Rav Ovadia Yosef, where he sometimes quotes the Pri Chadash to be mevatel minhagim, that he understood that the Pri Chadash, and this is how he follows, that any time you could prove that most poskim don't go like a halacha, doesn't matter what the minhag is, you could be mevatel the minhag. And that's a mistake in my opinion. And I'll prove it to you from a few places. Let's start when Rav Ovadia does bring the Pri Chadash in Chelek Yud, Yoredea, Yabia Omer, Chelek Yud, Yoredea, Simanun Chet, Ot Chav Bet, on He'arot to the Rav Pe'alim, Yoredea Chelek Gimel. So Ot Chav Bet, there Rav Ovadia Yosef takes issue with a minhag that the Ben Ish Chai seems to have endorsed or not went against. What was this minhag? Women in Baghdad wouldn't do kriya ala met, which is against halacha. Men and women have to do kriya. It's a mitzvah to do kriya. What would be the justification of keeping such a minhag? And Rav Ovadia Yosef quotes the Pri Chadash that even if a minhag is neged in isur de rabbanan, you should be mevatel the minhag. And he brings the Zera Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Benaim, who the Zera Yaakov himself argues on the Pri Chadash, and Rav Ovadia knows that. I mean, the Stechemet brings that it's a machloket between them as well, and he knows that he argues on it. But here he says he agrees to the Pri Chadash. What he means is because it's a minhag that nothing to rely on. Everybody holds a minhag that there's nothing to rely on, that you would be mevatel. Everyone. I mean, what I mean is that everyone, even the Zera Yaakov, but it could be that in certain cases, like the Marik's case, some people, maybe the Ben Ish Chai understood from the Marik that you aren't justified the minhag. But either way, he's evoking the principle of the Pri Chadash in a case where the minhag didn't have so much what to rely on. And he brings all these poskim, he brings the Pri Toar himself, who the Pri Toar took issue with the Pri Chadash, but he seems to bring him as a support, because once again, we're talking about a minhag that really doesn't have what to rely on. And therefore, Rav Ovadia Yosef says, Kol ika de ika chashash isur mevatli minhag, ve'en lachush bazeh mipnei kavod rishonim de lo mikabli minayu. And he says, and therefore I don't understand how Harav HaChasid, Harav Pe'alim, why he didn't find it important to be mevatel this minhag. Okay. That's Rav Ovadia Yosef in Yabia Omer, where he follows the Pri Chadash, but once again, you see clearly the minhag doesn't have what to rely on. In another place, the in Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat, let's examine that sugya closely, because there Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat is really something that's a pele. We know that the Rambam and many other Rishonim say to make a bracha and then be madikner, whereas the minhag for generations, not only by Chachmei Ashkenaz, but the minhag starting from the Rama, and the Chida, the Ben Ish Chai. Rav Yaakov Chaim Sofer in his Iskama to the Sefer that we just published, Piskei Chachmei Paras, brings kimat every single, remember we spoke about this last week, or 2 weeks ago, almost every single Sephardic country that we named, that we know about, had this minhag to lighting and then making a bracha. Besides in Baghdad, there was, it wasn't clear over there was 2 minhagim. So it seems to be clearly that there are Rishonim or Poskim Chashuvim, like the Rama and the Maril, Machzik Bracha, Ben Ish Chai, all held to be madlik and then make a bracha, like the opinion of the Bahag, that they held that's Kabbalat Shabbat Des Taluyin, and others held to make the bracha beforehand. So you would think over here, where is there a justification to be mevatel such a minhag? There's what to rely on. It's a strong minhag, the Bahag, those who understood the Bahag that way, and the minhag was nitpashet. So what would be the justification to be mevatel such a minhag? So Rav Ovadia Yosef has 2 long teshuvot. He has a few, but I want to discuss 2 long teshuvot where he explains his justification very clearly. One of his teshuvot is in Chelek Tet, Orach Chaim, Siman, I believe, Chav Dalid, and the other is in Yabia Omer Chelek Yud, Orach Chaim, Siman Chav Aleph. And there he's gonna explain where he's coming from, and I want you to listen closely. He says that Emet Agbigid, I don't understand. This is in Od Vav of Chelek Tet of the Teshuvah, Siman Chav Dalet Od Vav, towards the end. Yesh li tmoa me'od al gon Rav Yosef Chaim. How did the Ben Ish Chai justify this minhag? Mara'al azov divrei gdolei poskim al seva tilatam Rambam Maran, and he went after a few ladies that the Ma'aril wrote. She'en shum posek me'arishonim shiomar ken. There is no posek from the Rishonim that say this way. Like Maran Achida writes, Resh Samach Gimel. Al kol panim, barur sheminhag en lo shachar. This minhag has no significance. And then he writes, En ze chashuv minhag ela ma shenitkan al pi gdolei ador mare de'atra. And it's not called the minhag. That means if it would have been called the minhag, al pi gdolei ador and mara de'atra, and he says there's no Rishonim that hold this way, then I would agree. But there's no Rishonim, and it's something that there's it wasn't nitkan al pi anyone. This is where the Yesod HaMachloket lies. Not whether you're able to be mevatel a minhag or not. Rav Ovadia understood that this minhag that ladies light and then make a bracha is not called a minhag at all. Is not called a minhag at all. And he reiterates this in Yabia Omer Chelek Yud. He says that one of the young people, which I think he means Rav Yaakov Chaim Sofer, was not so young. He said, or maybe it means somebody else. I don't know. He says in Otchet, he says he's ma'arich that they shouldn't change their minhag, and he says Kol dvarav mehevel yimatu. Very very sharp words. Davar barur. If the Rav see that his words are accepted upon the tzibur, and he wants to be mishaneh the minhag that they were noheg shelo kedat gdolei poskim. Once again, it's a minhag shelo kedat gdolei poskim asher mipi anu chaim ve'anu olchim tamid achar horotam. Bevadai, this posek should mishanes motnav, should gather strength to be mitaken rabotenu aposkim, especially if he sees there's an isur, like the Pri Chadash writes. So once again, he evokes the Pri Chadash, but he's talking about that he understood that lighting and then making a bracha is not called a minhag. If he would have considered it a minhag based on shitot and nifshat, and it was known, then he wouldn't have been mevatel the minhag. Here, it's a pele, lechora, it's a pele, because now that we have found that from the Geonim, Rav Shrira Gaon writes explicitly, and I'll read you the Lashon. Rav Shrira and Rav Hai Gaon, Tshuvat Geonim, Minhaga de Milta, Od Hayom, Lifnei Madlikin Kama Denai Chalon, Umtagni Vetapu Mashcha Beshagi Yitzrachu, Vechadmatim Chashecha Behadi Tika Betagni Beshaga, Detafu Kalem Mashchim Mevarchinan. They light and then they're Mevarech. Bali Atosfot Sefer Aniyar, Dine Adlaka Ve'atmana. בשם רבנו יצחק, אנשים שנהגו שלא לברך על נר שבת עד אחר שהדליקו פתילה אחרונה, הדין עמהם כאשר הדבר בין אלוקים, לשון רבנו יצחק. So you have Bali HaTosfot, you have Rav Shira HaGaon, you have Rabbeinu Yona in Igeret HaTeshuvah, תדליק היא בעצמה ותברך בידיים נקיות, ברוך אתה השם. That's what's mashma. נוטל פתילה, also ספר התדיר, משה בן יקותיאל. נוטל פתילה או נר ומדליק ממנה נרות ומסיר דשנן ומדליק ומברך עליהם. So you have 3 or 4 Rishonim already were saying they held this way. Maran Achida writes that this is what it seems to be, it's a minhag miyusad. If this isn't a minhag miyusad, what is? To be choshesh for the bahag. And Rav Ovadia Yosef says there's a chashash isur as well because of bracha levatala. So on that, not only did Rav Ovadia Yosef himself write somewhere else regarding Nerot Chanukah, that if you made a bracha after, if you lit and then you make a bracha afterwards in the Miluyim, he writes that it's not called a bracha levatala. Ner Chanukah and Ner Shabbat is like the same. But the Aruch HaShulchan says that according to the Bahag, if you make a bracha and then you light, that looks like a bracha levatala according to the Bahag. Because how could you say that and then light? So there's a chashash isur this way as well. So it's a pele. Rav Ovadia Yosef, who says that if you have to be keep a minhagim and you have to be so careful in minhagim, why over here did he not consider this a minhag? We have these rishonim that we mentioned. We have these acharonim to say that it's not a minhag miyusad, that kimat kol acharonim were ma'atik. Yes, there are those who said we should follow the Rambam. But to consider that this is not called a minhag is a davar pele. If you would say that he held, yes, it's called a minhag, but you're allowed to be mevatel minhagim, that's one discussion. But that doesn't seem to be what he's saying. He is reiterating that it's not called the minhag. And I would just want to read to you that in the work of one of the Teshuvot of Rav Yaakov Chaim Sofer, he brings as well this point, and I want to bring to you that Rav Ovadia Yosef himself in Yabia Omer Chelek Zayin Orach Chaim Simantet Zayin Otalev Minhagis. I'm reading you Rav Ovadia Yosef's lashon. Minhag Yisrael Torahu. הרי אפילו מנהג תמוה וזר עלינו לעשות כל תצדיקי ללמד זכות על מה שסמכו שנהגו כן. או כמו שכתב פשוט מרם פדווה, שכן עשו כל כך בינינו שמצאו איזה מנהג תמוה, הביאו הגאון רב חיים פלאג'י, מסע חיים, שכן גדול ממסד משה, פרח אהרון, פשוט מרשדם, and Yabia Omer in Yoredea, or in that same חלק, כ"א עוד זין, כך כתבו גם מסתי חמד, הרי רב עובדיה יוסף himself, not only here, but in Chelik Vav as well, regarding a question regarding Yibum and Even Ezer, he says how important that each Edah should keep their minhagim. And each Edah should keep their minhagim. And not only that he says each Edah should keep their minhagim. He writes that if the minhag is what to rely on, you'd follow the minhag. But here he understood that the minhag doesn't have what to rely on. Let me give you another example. In Chelek Chet, in Yabia Omer, in Orach Chaim Siman Chav Bet Ot Chet, he discusses the minhag of the communities that answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo, whether it's bracha sheyotzei yedei chova, whether it's bracha shelo yotzei yedei chova. Now, this was a minhag that was for generations. It's clear that it was for generations. All of Hachamim Morocco. And until the Sefer Dvar Shmuel, Rav Shmuel Abuab questions this minhag. And he questions it. He says, you shouldn't do it because if you're Yotzei Yedei Chova, you shouldn't be doing it then. We know that there's a big discussion, and Maran Achida, after he goes through the discussion, he says, those who answer, Yesh lehem al ma lismoch. I don't have to go through all the Gdolim that said, Rabbi Basali once, Mamash min Kiddush, he waited. He felt it was extremely disrespectful not to answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Take a look. I gave a shiur. You could find it on Torah anytime that how Baba Basali understood when you say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. I think it's on Darkei Abotenu as well. That when you say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo, based on Rabbi Yaakov Abu Chatzera and his Farim, it's tremendous ilui. And because of this, people don't answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo even when everybody agrees. They're mezalzel in this whole inyan. He would be extremely makpid that he wouldn't continue kiddush until everybody answered Baruch Shemo. He'd have to wait there a long time, and not only him. It's even in the Bet Midrash of the Khatam Sofer, the Marig Shik says that they used to do it. They used to say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. And after Rav Ovadia Yosef is ma'arich against this opinion, and he says no, you shouldn't answer Baruch Shemo. He says like this. He quotes that it's not a real minhag. He says, those people who did it, so in other words, that Rav Shalom Mesa says that there was Gdolim who always did it, Imo Asilicha, there were Rabbanim Morocco that says that this was the minhag because they thought that Yeshal Mali Smoch. But especially Rav Machluf Abu Chatzir, who relied on Minhag Yerushalayim, that's what you should do because that's Minhag Yerushalayim also to answer Baruch Baruch Shemo no matter what. He's arguing against this. Nevertheless, he says nevertheless, if the reason why they did it is because they didn't know, and it wasn't called the real minhag. But once again, we see the same pattern. Because, in other words, not everybody knew this halacha. He's attacking the point, calling it that it's not a real minhag. Because if he would consider it a real minhag, he wouldn't have been mevatel the minhag. Very important point. Which means that the discussion is not that Rav Ovadia Yosef says anytime you feel that you have most poskim or a strong poskim, you could be mevatel the minhag. No. If you feel if there is a minhag and the minhag is enough what to rely on, even Rav Ovadia Yosef would understand that you're not mevatel this minhag. And this has huge ramifications. This would mean that if we prove that these minhagim of Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo, Hadlakat Nirot Shabbat, and countless others have strong sources to rely on, and they are not relying on thin air, then even according to this hashkafa of the Pri Chadash, you would follow the minhag. Like the Pri Chadash himself writes, that even if it's a minhag yachid, but is nitpashet, and like the Khatam Sofer writes, in the name of the Pri Chadash and the Shach, that a minhag meyusad v'kavua, which is what Magen Avot was based on. This is what we would follow, and this is what we would do. The sources that Rav Ovadia Yosef quotes is very much in line with this, that we're talking about a minhag that has what to rely on, then we would agree that we're not mevatel this minhag. And there is a place that he quotes that anytime you have rov poskim against something, you're mevatel the minhag. If you look inside, they're talking about what you were attacking was that it wasn't an established minhag, it wasn't minhag kavua. But if it would be a minhag kavua and a strong minhag, then you wouldn't be mevatel it. Okay, there's a lot what to discuss, but this is the point in the Mishnah Torah of Maran Rav Ovadia Yosef, which shows that this reinforces when Rav David Yosef spoke to me about a month ago. He said, my father was very tomech on good minhagim. He was very strong and very pro keeping minhagim. He didn't feel that anytime there's a minhag, you could be mevatel if you feel this way. What does that mean? Every generation you're going to have somebody who learned the sugya, he's not going to follow what his parents did? Of course not. Of course not. Rav Ovadia Yosef was a big proponent of minhagim, that they should be followed. There were certain things he felt that's not called a real minhag. He felt in Beruach Kodsho that he didn't feel it was a minhag. Hachamim Morocco knew for a fact that all the thousands of Gedolei Ador that they had that were noheg this way, researched it, they had poskim like them, and they felt in confidence. I mean, Hadlakat Nerot Shabbat is a perfect example. How much more of a minhag can you get after you see so many sfekot? You say sfekat to make a bracha, so over here you're not going to say like 20 times over a safek to be able to say that there's enough of a minhag to make a bracha, but he felt not that way. But that's the nikudat ha-machloket, not something larger than that. Okay? Chazaku baruch.